One year they pass a law that gives a right to abortion. A few decades later, the law gets taken away. One year, marijuana laws are so strict that impoverished mothers get imprisoned for years because they sell a little to feed their family. Before you know it, the laws change. And guess what? We are marketing marijuana like it's a soft drink. Hey, you're in prohibition, you outlaw alcohol. Before you know it, the very fact that you make it illegal creates an entire industry of illegal alcohol. Where is the wisdom? This is legal craziness. It is spiritual lunacy. Hi, I'm Mike Shevack. Welcome to GODSEARCH. This is podcast 26, and we are going to continue our very, very lengthy, I hope you are enjoying it. I hope you are following it. Our lengthy discussion on covenant, that incredibly bizarre idea that there is actually a purpose to human life, that is actually a purpose behind our organized existence, that we are not living chaotically, that we are not just subject to the flotsam and jetsam of the media, including me, that there is a purposeful, maybe a plan for some people who are extremely religious, but a purposeful destiny to the human species. So we're going to continue our discussion with covenant. We've talked about spirituality, which is the foundation of covenant, a living, breathing, flowing, growing, and knowing, which is part of spirituality. We talked about morality, meaning as you live and grow within life, there are certain experiences you have, like fingers that get burned when they're put in a candle. And you get generalized experiences that say, don't do this or do this, because what works, is the criterion. What creates good, or the concentrated experience we call God. And then you get moral guidelines. We talked about history, the fact that all of us together are in it and we are all teaching each other through shared life experiences how life works for good. How does life work to create good? Or what we call on God's search, the experience called God. But now we're going to get a little messy, and we're going to deal with the source of incredible contention and even misery on the part of people these days, which is legality. Legality. Laws. Laws. Who needs them? I mean, think about it. Who needs laws? They are a pain. They stop us from having our freedom. They get in the way. They are arbitrarily debated over. They are politicized. They are used to hurt people. Laws are our religion these days. Everything that we were complaining about by excessive authoritarian religions in the past, before we invented democracy and the rights of an individual in order to balance that, well, we're now doing with the legal system. And it's really a very muddled thing if you want to experience God. Now, on some level, laws are perfectly natural. Parents tell their kids all the time, you know, don't put your hand in a flame. Or they'll say things, let's change the analogy. They'll say, you have to remain a virgin or a celibate until you get married. That's an old-fashioned one. It's changed these days, but still there are people who consider that a law to their life. Others are more contemporary. Take your rubbers in case it rains. That's what my father always used to tell me and my brother. Take your rubbers in case it rains, right? These laws are up for debate and they're up for discussion. They require lengthy discussions on what is the correct way to approach these subjects. The correct, which on God's search, we mean code. How do you govern together? How do you govern together? Law is the foundation of our culture. We have the Old Testament laws, thou shalt not steal. That's a good one. Thou shalt not murder. That's a good one. And it's old because it was considered old by the Christians who considered themselves new, and it is ancient, but it doesn't mean it's antiquated. These laws are so general and such a real clear enunciation of what is, generally speaking, correct, that it is as if they have been pronounced on top of a mountain, maybe Mount Sinai. They are that dependable that, okay, they take a little modification here and there, but basically they're tried and true. And they're so generalized that they can be associated with a God of revelation, which is what religions tend to be about, especially in the West. But the problem we have with law is really not law because we all need laws. We all need speed limits if we're on a highway and people aren't paying attention to the fact that there are other lives around that are in danger. Okay, we all need law. The problem is authority. Who is the authority for the laws? We live in a democratic era right now, and that's a really good thing because we get input from the populace on what should be the governing principles of the culture. We have votes. We have people who are governed saying, this is how we approve of being governed. There's a collectivism involved. Of course, it wasn't the way it was when you had absolute monarchs and people could decide what they wanted to do because you were lower and they were higher, and hierarchy was the way it was decided. But in this era of democracy, we have difficulties because we are increasingly uneducated and we are increasingly paying attention to the authority of gossip on the television and in the newspapers. Have an incredible loss of truth, which is one of the criterion of God we established in the very beginning of God search. So you have in this era a very strangeness where democracy, which was used to debate the truth, to determine what is the highest truth and what is the greatest good and the least harm when you govern. What democracy is doing is it's simply averaging idiotic opinions. And it's averaging idiotic opinions. That's good. I always like to see things positively because if you average idiotic opinions, then the chance of the idiotic opinions actually gaining massive control without any counterbalance is a lot less. So there's some value to it. And that's why democracy is very good and why it's sometimes good to have political parties that are contesting with each other because it balances things out. But the problem is the amount of spiritual education that people have for this day and age is minimal. They'll have religious backgrounds, they'll have their own philosophical backgrounds, they'll have their own versions of atheisms, their own versions of what spirituality is, and there isn't an accord. And the lack of education, as Jefferson said, democracy will fail without proper education. Plato was worried about the same thing if you ever read the Republic. You know, in this era where individuals are getting involved with gossip upon more gossip, and this opinion versus that opinion, and we're getting what I call opinionocracy, you're also beginning to see a counterbalance to that mind crack. The counterbalance is increased authoritarianism, increased consolidation of government and economic machinery. You are creating a kind of democratically created authoritarianism to balance the democratically created opinionocracy and chaos. And we have to be very, very careful about that because law is very important. Law is a part of covenantal living. Law is a very important part of the vehicle, which is what a covenant is, by which we collectively can experience God. Law is a vehicle by which our God search can continue and we can be safeguarded without getting into too much trouble. It's a very important part for human history. It's become distorted, poisoned, politically twisted, and it lacks, if you remember an earlier podcast, it lacks value priority number 4. It lacks wisdom. Wisdom. Remember that? Wisdom is the most incredibly important and impossibly difficult to quantify aspect to law. And it doesn't have to be laws in government, and it doesn't have to be laws in religion. It can be the laws by which you live your life, the principles by which you live your life. It can be how you raise your family. It can be how you govern when you go to work and how you work with other people. These are all laws. How do laws develop spiritually? Let's talk about it because we're here on God Search. And if you understand how laws take place, you can fathom them much more and be much more conversant and knowledgeable about them, which will help us all. As we said, life has a certain structure to it. There's unity, it has truth to it, and there is a causal relationship of sowing and reaping and cause and effect, which produce results. And the results can be pleasant, the results can be not pleasant. And based on that, we have an experience of life. Life is our authority by which we can determine whether something was a good thing, produced good, or whether it was less good, commonly called bad. And that's the life experience. Now, when you have this kind of life experience, and we get kind of a moral sense that what I did was not right, I sought vengeance on an enemy. Well, that led to a feud. Well, maybe we should pay a little bit of attention to, Psalms in the Bible that tells us we shouldn't have vengeance on enemies. We should treat our enemies kindly, as in the book of Exodus, where we treat our enemies kindly so that we say, we prod their conscience that they're doing something mean by being nice. That doesn't mean justify enemies who are ruthless and want to seek your destruction. But if you have an enemy that is simply a little kind of wacko in their head, sometimes prodding their consciousness is the best solution to it, to make them realize that they could be better. It presupposes there's a good side of your enemy. But as you have these life experiences, you get general lessons such as do not seek vengeance upon your enemy. It's a general life lesson. And then from that, you can derive a principle. Thou shalt not seek vengeance to your enemy when they're basically good and maybe a little crazy. Okay? So that's a legal principle. Now, once you have a legal principle, then that legal principle can be turned into a rule of law, where it's put into a book and it says, vengeance is against the law. Vengeance is against the law. Now, once you go from morality to a general understanding to a legal principle, and you go to a legal principle, you then go to what's called a rule of law. So if you're looking at people's behavior, you can simply apply the rule. Well, there was vengeance here. There was something wrong. You shouldn't have done that. We have enough life experience as people, as persons, as society to know that vengeance is wrong. Uninformed, ignorant vengeance is wrong. And therefore, the person did badly. And then what happens is you have what comes out next level, which is from a rule of law. You get a legal system where they can punish the person or not punish the person. So you have morality, you get general lessons, you get legal principles, you have rules of law that we follow, we have legal systems. And then what human society does is it kind of does what life would do anyway, which is punish the individual. But it punishes them, you know, in order to keep human order. It's human beings imitating, in a way, life to give the person a punishment that they would get anyway if they waited long enough, because that's how human societies and all technologies work. Law is very much a technology. Law applies the laws of nature, concentrated through human beings, and applies them to the human situation. It's no differently than agriculture. You take agriculture, you take the laws of nature, you discover that you can put the plants in a nice row and you can get more plants and more harvest than you could by letting all the seeds go wild in nature. And by the same token, in a legal system, you farm the boundaries that are built into the experience of life. You farm those and you create more order than people would normally have naturally. And we discussed in earlier podcasts the fact that you cannot take any rule of law, any legal system, and you cannot worship it and turn it into an idol. You always have to then interpret the laws according to new experiences and form new what they call precedents and modify and mutate and change and evolve the law into an evolving system. That's why it is important to have debates around abortion where one is a yes and the other is no, because law must continue to evolve. When they're warring camps and they're each seeking vengeance upon each other, the legal system spiritually topples. It ceases to be aligned with life. It becomes imbalanced in extremis, and it's very dangerous. All our life experiences can be turned into principles or laws. You know, how to get married, who you should get married to, how to pay your taxes, what is the correct way to treat employees, what is the correct way to deal with harassment, right? How to avoid. These things can all be turned into laws. These laws, when they are spiritually correct, are concentrated human awarenesses of the proper boundaries that are built already into the design of life. You could say, if you were religious, God designed it a certain way, all right, or God commanded it a certain way, or an order, nice pun on the word command, exists. And these are the boundaries in the order. And human beings, because we are supernatural and because we have egos, can engineer it and concentrate these laws and create a human order so that we don't have to experience some of the downsides of being a simple, natural creature. In other words, squirrels steal nuts, but human beings don't have to steal. We can have an ideal that is higher than the mere animal nature. But we also have to have flexibility. And unfortunately, governments and religious governments, secular governments, all governments tend towards a rigidity which does not allow the ebb and the flow and the beauty and the learning and the flexibility that is part of life. The important thing here when we're discussing legality as part of covenant is it's important to have order. It's important for there to be certain rules that we have in agreement for the common good, as the Constitution defines it. It's very important. But life is bigger than us as individuals. Life is bigger than any individual. Life is bigger than any government. Life is bigger than any religion. Okay? Some people might say it differently. God is bigger than anything, and anything that isn't God is an idol. Don't worship idols. Because the good that we want to experience on a God search, the good, that's the experience called God. It's not just invented by human beings in our legal systems. That's the mistake. We don't invent good. We don't invent it. We don't conceive of it. We add to it. We add our own human kinds of things. That's called positive law in legal philosophy. You know, there are certain things that human beings do that nature doesn't. You know, we drive cars and we have speed limits. Those are positive laws. They're there to enhance the human creativity that is unique in life. And it is not built into the laws of creation or nature, which are called natural laws. Though that term natural law is very tricky. That's commonly called natural law. The laws, though, are fundamentally important for the experience of covenant, which is the vehicle by which all of us, people, persons, groups, religions, come into alignment with the laws of existence and creation, right? The laws are fundamentally basic. They're there as principles. They're not really laws. They're principles and guidelines. Don't steal. But if you're starving, life is more important, so steal something. Okay? Either pray for someone to help you, but if no one comes around, for heaven's sakes, steal something and stay alive. Okay? Britain learned that in the 19th century. Principles are very important. They help us, they govern us, they create order. It's really great. And the principle's purpose, law's primary purpose, is not to plague us or inhibit us or mess us up. Laws are there to prevent problems from arising. They are principles that are there to prevent, okay, difficulties, such as slow down on the highway when other people aren't as skilled and they're not Mario Andretti like you. Okay, they don't have skills. These principles, which are laws, are there to prevent problems. First and foremost, laws that don't prevent problems are not doing their jobs. All these laws for abortion, not abortion, all of these things, marijuana laws, alcohol laws, all of these laws, they should be there to prevent problems. Prevention, not to, overpower and stop people from expressing their freedom in a way that you don't like. They need to prevent problems with insight and with wisdom. If you remember, wisdom has three components: care, truth, and balance. Care, truth, and balance. So we have principles that are there for protection, for prevention of problems, for protection of problems. But these laws, which we are principles, are there to perpetuate the culture and the beauty of our civilization from one generation to the next. They create a continuity. They create a purposeful, flourishing, progression and flourishing, even an evolution, if you don't mind that word, of life. So basically, they're principles that prevent, protect, and perpetuate the lives of people. Lots of P's, lots of P's. Okay? But you must have wisdom, or your God search cannot interface with the mechanics and the arbitrariness of the legal system, which these days smells. It needs wisdom. It needs appointees to courts that are based on wisdom, not upon political party affiliation, not upon loyalty to the executives. In the United States, our legal system is a separate branch. Unfortunately, it has become a tool of the political party that is reigning. It always has been in some fashion, but it's even more so. And the legal system has also become the vehicle which determines the presidency ever since Bush Gore. Everyone looks to the court to determine who the presidency is. That is a warping of the fabric of our democracy. It is not the legal system that determines the presidency. The people do. And in my humble opinion, in that situation of Bush-Gore, the Supreme Court should have called for a re-election, another vote, okay? Not decide the presidency themselves between political parties. And here you get these strange craziness, spiritual craziness. You know, the new the philosophy of originalists, which is very popular and has a lot of worthiness to it, is maintaining the integrity of the Constitution as originally intended is a very important thing. But when you take originalism, which is a kind of legal religion, you get a little crazy because if you're going to support certain political parties, well, let's get real. Political parties are not even mentioned in the Constitution. The Constitution doesn't even talk about them. So what are we talking about when you have courts that are taking political sides? And I don't care what political side they're taking, okay? Whether it's a Brandeis Supreme Court, which was a little bit more liberal, or whether it's a Scalia Supreme Court, which isn't. I don't care. But the important thing is that political parties do not inject their philosophies into a court whose primary purpose is wisdom, is deciding between mind cracks on the best way to go. You know, my people, Jewish people, we had an invention, the rabbis discovered this, where they had differences of opinion. And that's very common. Okay? Jews always have differences of opinion. It's very hard to nail us down. We always have an opinion. But they did determine what was called a halacha, a way to go. Okay, given this, we have to have principles that prevent and protect and perpetuate people. Given these situations that we have, what is the way to go that has the greatest wisdom, the greatest benefit, and the least harm? Greatest benefit and the least harm. You see, that's wisdom. That's care, truth, and balance. And it's what must be embodied spiritually into the legal system in order for it to be covenantally alive, right? Can you solve problems with laws? Can you actually solve problems with laws? Sure, you can solve problems with laws. You can increase people's health very much by putting laws around excessive cigarette smoking. And you can help people with laws. Civil rights laws certainly helped people. But laws are not enough because laws usually come into play because people have forgotten, or they never learned, the correct way to be. You know, Christianity oftentimes criticizes the laws by saying, well, you have to have the right spirit. And that's true. You have to have the correct spirit, a spirit of love, a spirit of goodness, which is the experience called God. And then you don't have to be plagued as much by a bunch of people saying, do this, do this, do this, do this. The problem is spirit is not carefully understood. And spirit can sometimes be turned by any religion and any group consciousness into a cult very easily. Say this in the name of this, say this in the name of this, say this in the name of this. And it is a problem for everyone, including secular and secular atheist governments. This kind of cultism where you romanticize something in the name of something is not the solution to excessive law because it is not a true spirit. The spirit we are talking about in GODSEARCH, and go to yourgodsearch.com, please, and participate in this dialogue. The spirit we're talking about is that amazing, propulsive, evolutionary, astonishing force of life, which is in every single tiny quark in existence. It's in and through and everything and moves us forward in an evolutionary alignment between ourselves as living organisms and the inanimate, seemingly inanimate universe that we're in. That's the true spirit. It can be accessed through religion. It can be accessed through enlightened secularism. But you're not going to avoid it existing because whether you believe in God or not, or use the very, very dangerous G word to describe it, well, it exists. And when you open up your God search and you start to work on your God search, you will experience it for yourself. It does exist, and that spirit guides you and helps you determine the correct way to go when you have any kind of conflicts of law. As a general rule, when you're on a spiritual journey, handle law practically. It's not perfect. Human beings are not perfect. It's a very complicated thing. Respect the law because we all need to use the law, even though the law is not perfect. But be very, very careful. Now, some people use different terminology than I'm about to use, but this is how I'm doing it. Okay. Um, Sometimes a system like a legal system requires something ethically, but yet it's not actually moral. I'll give you an example. Let's suppose there's a job for a defense attorney, like O.J. Simpson's defense attorney, and his job is to get O.J. Simpson off. And let's suppose that attorney, I don't know if it's true, actually knows whether or not the murder took place. Well, does an attorney do what is morally correct by participating in releasing a murderer back into our society? And the answer is obviously no. The attorney does not do that. If it's a true murderer, all right, the murderer should be removed from society to prevent, which is what law is supposed to do, further damage from taking place. But here you have, because we are in a legal system, a curious contradiction where an attorney must ethically represent the murderer and ethically work very hard in a system with an opposing competition to free the individual. And that may not be morally right. The answer may not be ideal for society in terms of protecting life, but it is how the system operates, and it kind of supports and sanctifies the system, which allows for divergences of opinion, competition, and has a fundamental belief, very true belief most of the time, that somehow truth has a way of surfacing, and flux of opinions and flux of competitive viewpoints has a kind of balancing effect. It's the same principle we use with, political parties. Look, one must always try to obey the law. That's why Socrates killed himself, drank the hemlock. He could have escaped. But even though the law was falsely accusing him, he chose to not violate the law because he would be a terrible example to the youth to not pay attention to the law, and he would not do that. So if, as you continue on your God search, just remember to handle legal things respectfully and practically. Handle them. Don't get lost in recklessly abandoning yourself to violating the laws, or don't get lost in the opposite way of being so controlled and so nervous and fearful of the law that you can't breathe and you lose your direct connection to the amazing spirit, which is that life experience that opens you to the experience called God. Jesus put it in a nice way, looking at Caesar's coin. People asked him how you'd handle it. And he says, render unto Caesar what Caesar's. The system is made in the image of a man. Okay. But you have to pay attention to the quote unquote image of God. that invisible, amazing, flowing, progressing spirit of good, which is really the fabric of this world. Don't take my word for it. Get on a God search and you'll discover it for yourself. God search for truth and unity and the correct use of our ability to cause and effect and sow and reap is the foundation of a healthy, correct legal system. To be in a correct covenantal relationship in law requires a living, breathing involvement of all people in a God search. And in our country, there are multiple religions. We can't just have one religion, but they have many, many, many things in common that they can share. So we don't have to get too lost in a theological mind crack. So this is legality. It's messy. It's even messier. I could do 12 of these things on it, but honor the law. Use it for the effectiveness that it can be. But if you want to evolve the law, evolve yourself and teach other people how to evolve themselves. So together we will create new, clear moral insights that can be turned into new, clear sense of principles. And then we can create new rules of law and new legal systems, which include the best of the past and the best of the present. And we don't have to get lost in the current mind crack that we have, which, as I said in podcast 8, is a post-World War II nightmare fighting with a 1960s nightmare. The two nightmares together, right? So thank you very much. This is, again, Michael Shevack. Thank you for coming to God Search. Uncover God, discover God, and for heaven's sakes, recover. If you have been given a religion that is extremely religionist with lots of legalisms that drove you crazy, try to recover your sense of God from that excessive legalism and maybe, just maybe, bring your new spiritual insights to that religion and evolve that or find something you like better. Again, Michael Shevack, keep that God search searching. Just keep it going because we're headed for a wonderful covenantal experience if you do and make your contribution to it. Okay? God bless. And I will see you next week, same bat time, same bat channel. I think it's about 5:45 every Wednesday morning. God bless. Bye-bye.